Hello to everybody joining me. I'm Erin, and welcome to the Virtual Education Intervention Podcast. The name should give it away, but I'm here to educate, encourage, and entertain families and teachers who live and work with neurodivergent family members, friends, and students. And yep, you guessed it, my primary location for education is virtual. Sometimes we all just need a little more community, and we benefit from having people in our lives who understand how we live, how we work, and what our minds are consumed with daily. We just need support and encouragement within that space. If you're here, welcome to our community. Welcome back to the Virtual Education Intervention Podcast. Thank you to everyone that has tuned in so far. It's always exciting to see those 5-star reviews pop up, and we so appreciate how invested you are in the community that we are building. Before we begin, be sure to follow this podcast on whatever major podcast platform you use, and also like and follow us on social media. We're on Facebook and Instagram as Erin Luchterhand Coaching. You can also access a wide variety of information on our website or email us at erin@erinluchterhand.com. I'll make sure that all of this information is posted on the podcast description. If you've stuck around for the last few episodes, we've discussed executive function or executive function skills. Whether you've heard this term or not, I'm sure that you've used your own executive function skills today. Often impacted by neurodivergence like ADHD, autism, sometimes a learning disability, executive function skills are often called the CEO of the brain. They're a higher level cognitive skill that helps people manage tasks, solve problems, and adapt to new situations. They can include working memory, planning, regulating emotions, but that's not all. Formed in the prefrontal cortex of the brain, which is the very front forehead part of the brain, executive function, or EF skills, also include planning, prioritizing, attention, impulse control, task initiation, emotional regulation, flexibility, self-monitoring, and metacognition. EF skills don't just apply to one area of our lives. We need these skills across the board in our academic, work, and personal lives. Often, in fact, very often, neurodivergent individuals struggle with these skills. In fact, these challenges are often labeled as having executive dysfunction. Previously, we covered organization and working memory, both essential executive function skills. If you're interested in learning more about organization, check out episode 6. If you're interested in working memory, which is like that little sticky note in your brain, check out episode 7. Both are available on all major podcast platforms. But today, in this podcast, we're diving into metacognition. That's a really, really big fancy word to represent a foundational skill that impacts learning, problem solving, and self-awareness. We'll dive into the definition of metacognition shortly. This is a really important topic for parents and educators. Many neurodivergent students struggle with self-monitoring, planning, and adjusting strategies. Metacognition helps address these challenges. Strengthening your metacognition can also lead to greater independence and success in academic and daily life, which is, of course, our goal. We want our students to become as independent and successful as possible. One of my core beliefs is that we should help our children, all children, whether they're neurodivergent or not, reach to their greatest level of appropriate independence in their life. And that word appropriate is really important because I'm not going to expect student A to be able to achieve the same things as student B. We're all different individuals in terms of ability, skill, interest, and neurodivergence. Have you ever noticed a child repeating the same mistake without even realizing it? Or struggling to explain why they did something or why they chose to do something a certain way? That's a metacognitive gap. Let's dive into the definition of metacognition, or the metacognitive gap. Metacognition is the ability to think about how we think, learn, and solve problems. So I kind of like to think of it as thinking about how we think, but that's quite abstract. So ultimately, it includes recognizing our own strengths and weaknesses in our thinking and adjusting our strategies accordingly. We're going to dive into some specific strategies to help strengthen our metacognition in a little bit, but let's tie it back to an example. If I have a student who has a science exam coming up at the end of the week and they know they need to study, a metacognitive approach to studying would be, I study well when I learn through flashcards. So I'm going to use flashcards to help me understand the vocabulary that's going to be on my science test. I'm thinking about how I need to approach my learning because flashcards are a strategy that works for me. So when there's a metacognitive gap, oftentimes our students are lacking that ability to go from point A to point B. Perhaps they've learned different study strategies, but they lack the ability to connect the dots on when to use which one. Metacognitive knowledge. So there are two key components. One of them is metacognitive knowledge, which is knowing how we learn best. For example, this could be a child realizing that they remember things better when they read something out loud versus reading it in their head. That's great that they know that. It could also mean a child who knows that they learn visually or they learn through doing. They're a very kinesthetic learner or they're an auditory learner. So knowing those things about themselves can be really helpful. The other component is metacognitive regulation, which is actively monitoring and adjusting thinking. For example, this could be a student who starts solving a math problem one way, realizes that it's not working, and then tries a different approach. Oftentimes with neurodivergence, both of these things can kind of be a stopgap. First, if we lack self-awareness, we might not initially recognize how we learn best. Having a parent, a teacher, a tutor prompt the student to recognize some of their best learning strategies might be really helpful in this area. Having the conversation could look like asking a lot of questions because ultimately the goal is for our student to grow their own metacognition. We want them to be able to eventually independently get to the conclusion of, I have this thing I need to study for, or this thing I need to learn. Let me process the best approach for me. Maybe I need to read something and then try to model it. Maybe I need to read a definition, a vocabulary term, or a math principle. Maybe I need a math equation. Maybe I need to read it 3 times out loud visually, and then I need to try to repeat it out loud without looking at it, and then I do that repetitively. Maybe I need to pace the bedroom with my flashcards and include movement and kinesthetic movement with flashcards and repetition. Whatever the strategy is that works for that student, it can even relate to writing. I like my outlines this way. I know that this is a great strategy for me. So when I go to my test, I need to outline this first before I complete the full essay. It's a lot of self-awareness. Metacognition is steeped heavily in awareness, but also in flexibility. Going back to the math problem scenario, or whatever you're working on, it's the ability to recognize that your initial approach, or the one you're currently on, isn't working, or it's not getting you the results you wanted. It's that ability to pivot and try something new. Man, I'm really not remembering these science vocabulary terms with my flashcards. This usually works for me. I'm struggling with this today. Maybe I need to get up and pace while I review my flashcards. Maybe I need to swing on a swing or have a kickstand on my desk. Maybe I need to squeeze a stress ball while I'm doing these flashcards. Maybe I need my mom to quiz me with these flashcards. Or maybe instead of flashcards, I need to take a different approach. What else has worked for me in the past? And there can be, ultimately we want the goal of this to be an independent approach as our students get older. But these lines of questions that we want our students to take themselves through are often learned through time and modeling. So this is going to be a lot of teacher involvement, parent involvement. It's going to be steeped heavily in prompting and modeling so that the student can process through how they learn best. They can process through that flexibility. They can adjust their thinking, because these are not skills that are probably strong. They might have a gap here in these skills. So while we don't want to become our children's metacognition, we don't want to become their executive function for them, where they solely rely on us. We want to model this skill, and we want to gradually have them grow in their independence of it, where they no longer need us to walk themselves through this metacognitive process. Here's a simple analogy that's going to kind of give you another big picture of metacognition. Think of it like a GPS for your brain. It helps you set a route, adjust when needed, and then reflect on what worked or didn't work for the next time. I think that's a beautiful visual analogy of metacognition. Why is metacognition difficult for neurodivergent learners? So we're going to continue to dive into this, but there are some specific reasons that metacognition is difficult for neurodivergent learners. Like I said before, it's steeped in self-awareness. One of these challenges happens when our students lack self-awareness and self-monitoring. Many neurodivergent learners struggle with recognizing when they don't understand something or when they need a new approach. If they're reading something, they might just read it. Well, I completed the assignment, I read it. But they struggle to recall what they learned, and they don't understand that they're not recalling it or that that's important. Another example would be a child with ADHD rushing through work without realizing that they skipped key steps involved. They've completed the work. They're happy with the work that they've completed because it's completed. They're less concerned about the skipped steps or the incorrect problems. Another reason that metacognition is difficult for neurodivergent learners is that neurodivergent learners often struggle with impulsivity, task initiation, and flexible thinking. So metacognition is kind of overarching. So if neurodivergence is the umbrella for different thinking, then metacognition is kind of an umbrella for a lot of other executive function skills. It's that self-awareness component. Individuals with neurodivergence can have difficulty pausing to reflect before jumping into a task. They just want to go. They're impulsive. Let's just start. They also struggle with shifting approaches when something isn't working. They might kind of get stuck in that cycle or that kind of cyclical thinking of, but this worked, but I'm good at this, but this is what I do. And if it's not working, they struggle to move beyond that and to process through what else they could do, or to even recognize that it's not working. They may be lacking that self-awareness to recognize, oh, but this isn't actually helping you memorize the vocabulary. You're just reading the words and you're not really engaging in the activity. You're not recognizing that this isn't effective. So, example here might be a student with autism following the same routine even when a new strategy might be more effective. Another reason that metacognition might be difficult for neurodivergent learners is that research-backed connection to learning success. It shows that explicit metacognitive instruction improves problem solving, reading comprehension, and independent learning. So when we teach executive function skills through direct instruction, teaching metacognition is so important because it helps our students with that problem solving. It helps them grow in this skill of increasing their metacognition. So before, when I mentioned that we might have to have modeling, we might have to have prompting, yes, that's true. But when we have direct instruction and we teach our kids, we actively teach our kids what metacognition is, we are educating them and we're enabling them to start to take the lead. They can't take the lead if they lack that awareness, if they don't know what it is. I've said it before and I'll say it again. I'm a huge advocate for students knowing that they have a disability or that they are neurodivergent. And I'm a huge advocate for them understanding what that means for them. Because as we grow, we need to learn how to advocate for ourselves. Children with neurodivergence, children with disabilities become adults with disabilities. And adults with neurodivergence, disabilities, special needs, they have needs, and they have needs that are highly impactful of their life, regardless of the neurodivergence. And they are going to need to self-advocate. Metacognition is so valuable in their ability to do that because it has this level of self-awareness. A study found that students who were taught to self-monitor while they were reading had significantly better comprehension than those who didn't. Self-awareness can help our students advocate for themselves. It can help them understand what strategies work well for them, and it can help increase that flexibility if they need to pivot. Now, I'm going to pivot here in our podcast away from reasons why metacognition is hard to ways we can support metacognition at home and in the classroom. So our community is built up of parents, it's built up of support members, family of individuals with neurodivergence. It's also built up of teachers and educators and tutors and interventionists. So here are ways we can support metacognition both at home and in the classroom. Number one, we're going to model that metacognition. Even when we're not directly working with our students, we're not coaching them, we're not teaching them metacognition, if we can verbalize our own thinking process, our students don't even need to know this is a teaching moment, but we are modeling our own thinking process. It has nothing to do with our students aside from the fact that you want them to observe you. You're going to verbalize your own thinking process. It might look like this. It might say, I'm trying to figure out how to schedule my day. First, I'll write down all of my tasks. Next, I'll decide which are most important. And you're going to kind of verbally process that. It may also look like, I need to take the kids to soccer practice, but Dad needs to use the car to go to a work dinner. How are we going to figure out this problem? And you're allowing your children to observe you verbalizing your own thinking processes, and eventually they're going to absorb that. And what we teach our kids at home and what happens in the school, that's the foundation for their own thought process. We want to encourage children to verbalize their own thought process. Can you help me figure this out? Or can you tell me how you figured that out? How did you get there? That's great. Use that as a really positive reinforcement question, a reinforcement, but also having them process that for you and explain it back to you can be really helpful. We can also use mistakes as learning moments. Instead of using the phrase, you got that wrong, you could say something like, well, let's think about what strategy you used. Was it helpful? Did it work? Was it the best choice, or do you think there was a better choice? So it's not a negative moment for your student. It's not something you have to make negative, but it allows you to use that as a learning moment, as a teachable moment where the student's the one that's reflecting. And those are some really great questions. I love what strategy did you use? Was it the best choice, or can you think of a better one for next time? And you're prompting them to kind of think towards the future. This second support that we recommend being used both at home and in the classroom is explicit strategy instruction. Teaching kids to ask themselves the guiding questions of, what do I already know? What's my plan? How will I check my work? This can be utilized in the classroom. What do I already know? So if you're in, math class and you're learning a new equation, you're learning something new, you can tell I'm not a math person. Or let's switch gears. What if you're in English class and you're reading literature and your teacher asks you about the chapter you just read or you're about to read? Well, what do I already know? What's my plan for completion, and how am I going to check my understanding? So if I'm assigned to read a chapter in my book, what do I already know about the story? What's my plan to complete the chapter? And how will I check my work? How will I recognize my understanding of the chapter after the fact? And these are really great guiding questions because it forces us to make that plan and to check our work, increasing that self-awareness. We can also use visual supports, checklists for planning, questions for self-reflection, graphic organizers to break down our problem solving. However that relates to the assignment in school, visual supports are really, really helpful, and I love graphic organizers that break things down. If you're having students write, having an outline, a very visual, detailed outline is awesome. But having those visual supports can really help students guide themselves. A third way that we can use these strategies at home and in school is to encourage the reflection, especially when we're working with our very literal thinking students. Perhaps they have autism. Reflecting on what they've read, reflecting on what they've experienced, reflecting on what's going on in their life can be really important. It's not something that they often naturally do. So journaling something or using a voice recording to reflect on their learning strategies might be really helpful. What worked for me today? What didn't? And this can apply to home. What worked for me when mom asked me to clean up my room? What worked for me when mom asked me to put my laundry away? What didn't work? Or at school, what worked for me when I was trying to go from class A to class B and I was late? What didn't work for me? So there's a lot of reflection. And again, this is something that can be modeled. We can show our children, or we can do I do, we do, you do. A lot of ways we can integrate this. Prompting, modeling, super important. Another fun little strategy is the glow and grow method. The glow is what did I do well? Grow, what can I improve next time? So it's just a fun little play on words that helps students evaluate and reflect on things. For example, after a test, the students reflect on which study strategies help them most. Okay, glow, what did I do well on the test? Grow, what can I improve next time? What other strategies can I use? A fourth strategy that we recommend using, metacognitive prompts for learning. So before a task, we're going to specifically identify what the goal is and what steps they're going to take. So this incorporates planning, organization, prioritization, the other executive function skills. Oftentimes the challenge with planning, prioritization, organization is that our students can intellectually give an answer that's correct, but they struggle to carry it out. That impulse control, that task initiation, it hinders their ability to actively carry it out. I have a brother with ADD, and he will tell you, I know exactly how to do the task. I can intellectually tell you, but when it comes to doing it, like it's gone because of that task initiation, that impulse control, right? I'm going to go do something different because that's top of mind. So sometimes that planning piece can be a challenge, but if you're doing it immediately into the activity, you're incorporating it into whatever activity you're doing, whether it's school or home. So before you complete the task, what is my goal? What do I hope to achieve? And what steps will I take? And then you're going to immediately go do it. For example, if I asked my girls to put their clean laundry away, what's my goal? I want my clean laundry from the basket into the closet, basket into the dresser. What steps will I take? Okay, I'm going to take my shirts and I'm going to put them in the dresser. I'm going to take my pants. I'm going to put them in the dresser. I'm going to make a pile of hang-up clothes. I'm going to get the hangers from the closet and be really specific, but also really immediate, really prompted, really body doubled, supported. So you're not allowing time to happen between creating the plan and executing the plan. But while you're doing the plan, this goes before the task, during the task, after the task. This is the strategy. So before the task, what's my goal and what steps will I take? During the task, am I on track? Do I need to adjust my approach? Okay, I have my big pile of hang-up clothes, but man, that's overwhelming. I'm sitting down, I'm not completing the task. Okay, how do I need to change my task or my approach? Maybe I need music to get me jazzed up. Maybe I need somebody else in the room. How do I need to adjust my approach if I need to pivot? And then after the task, did I meet my goal? And what would I do differently next time? So in the example of completing the chore at home, perhaps I'm going to say, yes, I met my goal, but it took me a lot longer. It would help me next time if I had a body double in the room and some music playing. In school, this might look like a student solving a math problem, checking into each step to make sure they're still using the correct method. So these strategies can be applied differently in different environments. Another thing that works really well with our neurodivergent learners is gamifying things, turning something into a game, giving it a little bit more of a purpose, little dopamine hit outside of, like, especially when it's a non-preferred task. Go back to putting laundry away because it's one of my least favorite things to do. But gamifying something, using rewards and incentives, sticker charts, points, even like actually creating a game around it. We want to turn self-monitoring into that a fun little challenge. So like, how many times today can you catch yourself using a good learning strategy? How many times today were you kind to somebody? Or did you say hello to other people? How many times today did you use the correct color highlighter for whatever your color-coded strategy is, right? Turning it into a fun challenge. And oftentimes those reward systems can be really, really helpful. Another, example might be that a student earns a badge for identifying 3 different ways to solve a problem, incorporating this idea of self-monitoring, self-awareness into that metacognition. So we're going to wrap up, and as we wrap up, we're just going to do a few recaps, a few closing thoughts to leave you with a strong understanding of metacognition. Metacognition is a powerful skill that helps neurodivergent learners become more independent. As parents and educators, we can support metacognition by modeling thinking out loud, encouraging reflection, and using guiding questions. I would also add on here that we can support it over time and through patience. Much like all of the executive function skills, metacognition can take time to really develop independently. Our brains function on neurons. And I've said this before, there's some really awesome YouTube videos on neurons and connecting neurons in the brain when we learn something, so I'd recommend looking those up. But when we learn something new, neurons connect in our brain. And the more we do that same thing, the more neurons connect and the stronger that connection becomes. Eventually, it becomes like a well-worn path, and the information can flow very quickly and almost becomes like rote memory. We don't have to think about it anymore. But until we get to that point, we have to think about it, and it takes intention. And so when we're practicing these executive function skills, we have to allow time for these neurons to connect, for the neurons to strengthen, and for the neurons to become that well-worn path. Once we get to that point, your kids are going to be flying through these skills. But we have to allow the time, the consistency, the repetition, the encouragement to allow that to happen. In fact, when I'm working with my students, whether it's with dyslexia or executive function, whatever we're working on, we talk about neurons and connection because I want our students to understand the value of the repetition that they're doing. Why do I have to do this again? And I used to say, well, you're going to do it until you're blue in the face, but you're going to understand it, right? And that was my understanding that repetition was important. But I lacked the understanding at the time to recognize that it was the time needed for the neurons to connect and develop and for them to become a well-worn path. And so as educators, as parents, we're going to support it by modeling that thinking out loud. We're going to model it. We're going to encourage reflection. We're going to use guiding questions, but we're also going to give it time. We're going to give it consistency. And so we want those neurons to develop. And once they do, our kids are going to really, really get it. So my question to you now is, what are some of the metacognitive strategies that you plan to try with your child or your students this week? Simply start by asking, what's your plan? And so I'm using a metacognitive strategy for you, my listeners. What's your plan? What's your plan to support your own children? What's your plan to support that ADHD student in your class? What's your plan to support that autistic student in your class? Or that dyslexic student in your class? What is your plan to include these metacognitive strategies that we talked about today, or some other strategies that you may be aware of? How did it go? Do you need to pivot? Do you need to change your strategy? So we often use these metacognitive strategies with ourselves, in our lives, with our students. Oftentimes with my own children, I find myself evaluating the approach that I'm taking. Is it being effective? Do I need to pivot? And there's just a huge layer of self-reflection and understanding that sometimes a strategy works. And it works in this season, or it works in this situation, and sometimes we need to make a change, or we need to be flexible. And that's a beautiful ability that our brains have, and sometimes we have to support our students with that. But ultimately, my challenge is, what is your plan? I hope you'll take a deep dive into some of our other episodes on executive function skills. We have an episode on executive function skills in general, and we've also done a deep dive into several other specific skills. Next week, we're going to do a deep dive into the executive function skill of emotional regulation. Who knew that was an EF skill? We want to understand how to manage the stress and learning effectively, how that emotional regulation or emotional dysregulation impacts our neurodivergent children. So I hope you stick around for that episode next week. Erin Luchterhand Coaching is a mission and vision-driven small business designed to support you. As a team, we provide virtual intervention and education to break down barriers and create access to research-based tools that empower neurodivergent individuals. By addressing challenges specific to neurodiversity, our sessions foster growth, resilience, and self-confidence, equipping students and adults with the skills they need to thrive. We envision a world where neurodivergent individuals are empowered to embrace their unique strengths, knowing they are created on and for a purpose. Through innovative virtual interventions, we strive to build a future where every learner feels valued, capable, and confident, all while fostering a shared joy in the journey of growth, discovery, and success.